Well, welcome and good evening. Friday night. Richie, how are you?
I'm okay, mate. You?
I have to say, you know what I've been like for the last few hours. I've been very excitable about this guest. It's kind of like meeting your idol, and probably as close as I've been, barring standing on the Gallagher. So I know you were at the Irish Centre a while back and got to experience that. But I am very excited. So yeah, we kind of are on a slight time constraint. But what we'll do, without further ado, is bring on an absolute Newcastle United legend, the one and the only. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce Gavin Peacock. Gavin, welcome, sir. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
Good evening, fellas. Great to be on your show.
Thanks very much. We're absolutely delighted to have you on. As most people know that watch us on the podcast, I am a bit of a chancer, and I tapped you up and said, Gavin, when are you going to come on? And you were like, yeah, no problem. Drop me a DM. And I was like, I actually thought it was somebody who was having a little rise with me. But true to your word, I sent you an email. You came back really good, and here we are tonight. So from our perspective, as a lad that stood on the terraces and really enjoyed those games. Over the 3 seasons that you were kind of at Newcastle United, it's an absolute privilege and an honor. So we're going to keep it really, really retro tonight. We just want to talk about your whole ride with Newcastle United, favourites, time there, and everything else. So obviously, from a career point of view, you played for QPR, Gillingham, Bournemouth, Newcastle, Chelsea. Back to QPR for a while and then on to Charlton. But obviously the story of how you got to Newcastle, 30th of November, you joined with the Black and Whites and got to St James's from Bournemouth, £275,000. Jim Smith was the manager at the time. So how did that, for anybody that doesn't know, how did that happen? How did you get from Bournemouth to St James's Park?
Yeah, well, it's a strange one, and the connection with Jim Smith is unusual as well. Is when I was at QPR as a kid, Jim Smith was the manager there, and he gave me my debut for QPR. And then I left QPR, went to Gillingham, Bournemouth. Harry Redknapp bought me at Bournemouth. That was their record signing in 1989. And then a year later, Jim had gone to Newcastle. And I was just in training one day with Harry, and I looked over, and Harry's on his phone. And usually with Harry Redknapp, if he's on his phone, he's placing a bet on the Dogs, or he's doing a deal on a player. And this time he was doing a deal on a player, and he called me over and he said, Gavin, Newcastle United have come in for you. And for me, that's all I needed to hear. Because my roots go back to Newcastle. My granddad Tom, that's my dad's dad, is born and bred in the area, all family in South Shields. I've been going up as a kid for holidays. My first kit was a Newcastle kit, even though my dad played for Charlton for 17 years. He bought me a Newcastle kit as my first kit. So as a little one, I've got my little Newcastle kit on. I'm over the heath up in the northeast with my family. So then when Harry said Newcastle come in, I didn't have to think twice. Went home to my wife and said, we'd only been married a year, just got a nice house sorted. And I said, Newcastle have come in for me. We've got to go. And she wasn't too, she knew where it was. I said, it's up north and it's cold. I said, but it's a big club, great fans. And if it takes off, it'll be super.
So was it much of a lifestyle change to go from South Coast up to the balmy northeast? I think I heard a story that yourself and I think Amanda had just kind of bought the house in Bournemouth and were doing it up.
Yeah. And
then kind of it was a straight move up to Newcastle. So what was it? Was it much of a drastic change or?
Well, I mean, you can imagine, the Bournemouth's lovely, isn't it? And it's on the South Coast and it's pretty warm there. And yeah, we were enjoying our life down there. But obviously it's one of those, when Newcastle came calling, I knew I had to go. And yet Newcastle's a great area, fantastic city, super people. This is what my wife would say if she was on the podcast, that the time at Newcastle was her favorite time of my whole football career, and very much because of the people. Made you feel at home, and that's what I knew. You see, so it wasn't so alien to me because my relatives were up there, and I knew the feel of the place, and I knew what the people were like, and so we were made feel very welcome, felt very at home straight away, and my granddad just said to me, because it was just a dream for my granddad that I signed for Newcastle, and he just said, "Son, if you sweat blood for their team, they will forgive you many mistakes on that football field. They just need to know that when you pull on that shirt, you would die in that shirt, just like they would if they had the opportunity." And I never forgot that. So the combination, I think, of my family roots there, the people making us feel welcome, and then that kind of drive from a granddad as to what it meant to the fans. I got off to a really good start, and it just never looked back.
Yeah. You talk about Charlton. My mum was born in London. My granddad and my uncle were both ticket holders for Charlton. My uncle is, and he's had his ticket now and attended Charlton games for just on 70 years now.
Cool.
So he started going with his dad when he was very, very young, and has been going at the time when there was conversion or whichever way the clubs worked out, that Arsenal at the time was still called the Woolwich Arsenal.
Wow.
So all around that area. So he still gets out to Charlton and everything else. So I kind of spoke to him this week. I said, Gavin Peacock's coming. I went, oh, I know his dad.
Yeah.
So it's like he was delighted to hear you were coming on. So you get to Newcastle. What were that first going into second season really, when you change is starting to happen, and Kevin is pulling together that squad, and you win, 92 season, you win the championship that year. What was it like first year into second year or so, when you started to see players coming, and you started to find your feet? Because some of the goals, I was kind of looking at matches and everything else, so trying to work out goals and everything else, and we'll ask you about your favorite goal shortly. But my personal one to I suppose try and give an inroad is Ipswich Town, 11th of April 92. You scored 2 goals. The first one was an absolute blinder. Clarkey plays a ball into you, and you just kind of pirouette, turn the defender, and rocket the ball in. Now, the second goal, to be fair to you, wasn't that bad either. But two very good goals. But that transition and starting to settle, what was that like? And those first few games and stuff for you?
Well, when I joined Newcastle, the team had just missed out on getting promotion the season before under Jim Smith. And so they had some good players, experienced players, like John Burridge, and there was Roy Aitken, and obviously there was Mickey Quinn and Mark McGee. I mean, what a strike force they were. And so I knew there was some experienced players there. And I was a youngster, really. I was possibly one of the youngest in the team, but I didn't feel the pressure so I think the older players were. So I kind of felt free when I came. I think I scored in my second game, maybe at Plymouth away, and yet Jim was under pressure, so he got sacked after I want to say even 6 weeks of me being there, maybe a couple of months, and then Ozzy came in, Ozzy Ardiles. Now, Ozzy was fantastic in terms of he was a guy that really encouraged young players and encouraged us to play good football. The problem was we weren't good enough defensively. So we had this team under Ozzy that began to sort of play without fear, and he's bringing in the youngsters. Obviously, Steve Watson had broken through, Lee Clark, Stevie Howie, David Roach, Lee Maker, all these kind of players were coming through, all youth products. Alan Thompson, another one. And if you think of some of those guys, like what they went on to achieve, Ozzy gave them their start. So I think Ozzy was well loved with the players. The fans liked him because we played some attractive football.
Football, yeah.
Yeah. And they could see that the youngsters were giving it and trying. But we couldn't get enough wins. We were letting in too many goals. So then Ozzy got the sack, and that would have then been in my second season.
Yeah.
Of course, Andy Hunt was another player that was coming through, and it was a really sad day, guys. At the training ground, there were tears when Ozzy got sacked. Lee Clark just thought of Ozzy like a dad, hugging him and everything, and a nicer man you couldn't wish to meet. And I was driving back because when a manager's sacked, I mean, bear in mind, it's 2 managers. I've been up there just over a year. You're always wondering who the new guy is going to be. Will he fancy you as a player? Bit unsettling. And I was driving over the Tyne Bridge, and then I heard it announced that we've signed Kevin Keegan, and I was just thrilled because I had pictures. I think I've got a picture somewhere of my bedroom wall when I'm a teenager. I've got a picture of Glenn Hoddle and one of Kevin Keegan.
Class.
On my wall from Match Magazine or Shoot or something like that. And of course, my dad would point at Kevin as a player, and he would say, "See him." He'd say he has manufactured himself into the best player he could be. There are other players out there with greater talent even than Kevin. Not that he wasn't talented, but he has made himself into the best player he could be. Look at his fitness, look at his attitude. And he was really one of football's first millionaires in the fact that he could retire. And then, it was a matter of Kevin coming in and addressing us in that first session at the training ground at Benwell. That was a cold place, if you remember Benwell, the training ground.
Yeah,
the wind
still is, mate.
the wind never dies down, not even in the summer. And he just looked at all of us. He got us all in there. He said, "Listen," he said, "if any of you do not want to play for this club, you come see me afterwards, and I will make sure that you go." In other words, he's drawing a line. He only wants people at the club that want to be at the club. And he wanted to sift those out quickly that didn't. He said, "But if you want to stay," he said, "we will survive this season," because we were obviously struggling. He said, "and then we will take off." So immediately, great leadership. He sets a line, a bar. He gives us a vision of survival, and then we'll take off from there. And then he went about showing us how that could happen. And it was Kevin alone, obviously I scored goals, Dave Kelly scored goals, people played their part, but Kevin's willpower and leadership dragged us through that season to survival.
Would you say, obviously you mentioned Glenn Hoddle, and obviously when you did eventually move from Newcastle, you went to Chelsea, you were one of Glenn Hoddle's first signings. But with the players you've kind of played for and played under, talk the likes of Jim Smith and Ozzy, Kevin, Glenn, Glenn Hoddle and the guys, who was the best kind of manager as a manager that you had in a club?
Yeah, Kevin for man management. I mean, Glenn had other great talents and was a genius to play for. But Kevin for man management, and as a story, I've told it before to different folks that his first game in charge was Bristol City at home. There's 30,000 Geordies in that stadium. They locked 5,000 out because they, just couldn't. It was at capacity, and everyone was there to see Kevin. Kevin obviously returning, having played for the club as well, brilliantly before he left. And he's going around the dressing room beforehand, and of course he'd been in Marbella playing golf with Sean Connery for 7 years. He hadn't really been watching much English football, so he didn't really know too much about the league. About different players at the Bristol City team, nothing. He'd only been in the country a few days. And I saw him talking to different players, and then Lee Clark, and then to David Kelly in there. And he came to me and he said, "You're the man today." He said, "You're the man." He said, "Bill Shankly used to say to me," and already I'm like, Bill Shankly, that's a legend of a Liverpool manager. And he treated Kevin like a son. And he said, "Bill Shankly used to say to me, just go out there and drop hand grenades all over the field. In other words, just go out and cause trouble because you're the danger man." And I thought, well, Shankly said that to Keegan, and now Keegan's saying that to me. I burst down the tunnel. I felt 10 foot tall. I ran all afternoon. I think I made 2 goals. David Kelly scored a couple. We won 3-0. And from that moment onwards, I always said to people, Kevin Keegan is a motivator of men. He knows what to say to different players to make them tick. And a few years later, when he got the England job, they played Poland at Wembley, and Paul Scholes scored a hat-trick. And I read in the paper the next day, Scholes said, Keegan is a great motivator of men. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's what I've been telling people for years. And then I read on, he said to me before the game, just go out there and drop hand grenades all over the field. And I thought I was. but the point is, Kevin knew, and I'd watch him go around the training ground. Even in the season we got promotion there, and he talked to John Beresford, he talked to me, he talked to individually as well as corporately, and that was one of his greatest strengths. The other one is like his persuasive power. Like at the end of that season when we survived, I was out of contract, and Premiership clubs were wanting to sign me. Middlesbrough was one. And I remember go to the main ground back to St James's in the afternoon for a sauna, just to like loosen off. And I'd be in the sauna and Kevin's head would pop up at the window. He'd say, it's going to get a lot hotter around here. Sign for the club. And then pull me in the office and convince me. And so he had this persuasive power, which was magnetic. And so I ended up obviously signing. And it was a great move to sign again for Newcastle.
So that season, so you sign again, and then we have that season, and the players coming around. Obviously, me and Richie were talking. We were looking back at the squad of players, and some of the players you forget. The likes of Kevin Brock, Scott Sellers, Kevin Scott, Liam O'Brien, David Kelly, Andy Cole eventually comes in. It was absolutely phenomenal looking back and thinking about some of those games. But what was it like for you as a player when that season kind of took off? And was it a realization of, this, we're actually going to do this here and go up? And was there a point where you knew you were definitely going to do it? Or was it just kind of riding on the crest of a wave? And what was it like in, at that time as a player to be in St James's with that kind of, season going on?
Well, bear in mind, we'd had the battle against relegation the season before, which went obviously to the wire. We had Portsmouth at home, where Dave Kelly scores that great goal, and then we go to Leicester away, and it was just an epic day in the way that it rolled for us. And so we come off the back, and it's a funny feeling because you have this euphoria at survival in terms of a relief, but it's this kind of great joy. It's not the same as promotion, but there's still a great joy. We went into the summer. I was just wondering, right, who are we going to sign? And of course, Kevin signs Beresford and Bracewell and Venison, and sort of three fairly defensive players to start with. And you're thinking, it's an interesting one, but he wanted a platform for the attacking players to go on and play. That's what he'd always say. So you guys give these guys the platform. Myself, Dave Kelly, Clarkey could then be freer in our forward play. And Kevin had said to us, he said, when you're not doing well, and you're losing, a bit like Newcastle at the moment, you're in a habit of losing. Your confidence is low. Even you go into the game with the best of intention, then that goal goes against you, or you start to go one or two behind in the game, and players lose that kind of, it's not even the will to try. And I'm not saying that efforts couldn't be higher at different times, but it's almost a mental thing where the energy drains out of players. He said, but when you're winning every week, you can't wait for the next game. You just can't wait for the next game. And that was very much what started. We've started winning, won the first game, Southend at home, and then we've gone on this roll, and we started to believe that we can win every game. I'd go out there thinking it doesn't matter if we go a goal behind, we'll still win. We had a good base with the players that he'd signed, and then a key was bringing in Rob Lee from Charlton. And Kevin pulled me. He said, because my dad was at Charlton, you see, as a coach by this time. He said, Rob Lee at Charlton, I hear he's coming out contract, and you know, what do you think? I said, sign Rob Lee. I said, really good player, highly rated, you know, he's versatile, can get a goal, he can put his foot in for a tackle, create goals. So without knowing too much, he signed him, and you know the story probably that Middlesbrough were interested.
Told him Newcastle, yeah.
Yeah, and he said, and of course, being a London lad, Rob wants like to get back maybe once a month down to London, and Kevin said, "Well, Newcastle's way closer to London than Middlesbrough." And Rob went, "Oh, is it? Okay." And he signed for Newcastle, so I'm sure it was more reasons than just that. But Rob's bad geography anyway led him to sign, and that was a great move. And Rob just got better with every game. So we started to play this football, and it was the first 11 games. Obviously, it's, you know, historic the way that we did that. And I can tell you that in that first 11 games, and then in the season, I have never played in a team with such good football and such unity. And that team would have done it, you know, at any level. And so, you know, that says it all for me. And I've played with some really good players, obviously at Chelsea, that Ruud Hullits and the different ones, the Zolas. That team there was superb. And fans will still say they look back to that time. Obviously, then there was the entertainers that came afterwards as just superb. And you go out there and the place would be just rocking. And we were providing entertainment for the fans week after week. And that's the thing. You got to think, Newcastle fans, working class background, there's a history at that football club, and they want to know when they go to watch their team, they pay their hard-earned money on a Saturday, they want to know, they want to be entertained, and they want to see that those players give everything for the club. And I think they got that in that season in abundance.
Yeah. I remember that season, and it was, I think, even as a fan, you know, in that role of that first 10, 11 games, I remember rocking up to St. James's Park, and you never thought you'd get beat. No, you know, you were going, you know, have a beer or do whatever, or grab a bite, you know, go into the Gallagher, you know, pick up your program, get set. But you never ever once kind of thought that you would get beat, or as you said, even if we went behind, we were never going to lose.
No. Well, the other thing, Martin, I mean, you lads will know. What about the away support we take with us? I remember going to like a place like Peterborough, and we like fill half the stadium. And the 5,000 Geordies in the stadium, or 20,000 are out shouting the home fans. So even on away games, we were crushing it with our support, and so you're going to away games as if almost like it was a home game in terms of your confidence levels.
I told my mate, he's a Newcastle fan, and he said, "Can I ask a question?" So I said, "Yeah." So he said, "Can Gavin tell him who was the best player that season in the team other than you?"
That is a hard.
Now he did text me tonight, and he said he doesn't want to cause controversy, so if you don't want to answer it, it's fine. But he says you were the best player in that team, but he's wondering from your perspective, do you think there was a better player than you that season in that team as it ran?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, there were some really good players that season. I mean, obviously, I missed the last month of the season with the hamstring
injury.
Yeah. And up till then, Dave Kelly and I were neck and neck for goals. Obviously, Dave finishes and he gets the golden boot. Dave Kelly, Lee Clark, obviously Beresford was fantastic for us as well. I think Liam O'Brien had a good season. A young Stevie Howie coming through was excellent as well. It would be hard to pick out one. I'd like to know who Kevin thought was the best that season, because he was clever, Kevin, because he knew the strikers, the forward players were getting the headlines. Myself, Dave Kelly, even Clarkey to some extent. But what he would do is he'd make a big deal of this week, Barry Venison. Look at this guy, Venison, blah, blah, blah. That's a good picture, isn't it? Like me and Clark.
It
Yeah,
is,
so
yeah.
scoring against West Ham, I believe, at home. And you see the armband the white tape. That's all you had as the captain's armband. And that was the first time I'd captained Newcastle. One of my great highlights.
That shirt is probably one of the most iconic shirts and fetches so much money now to get hold of one. Is
Really?
Absolutely crazy prices. And I can remember having that shirt, but you had to get the little patches for the arm separately, and your mum had to stitch them on, or they had like web stuff on that you had to put the iron across them, and if you touched off the black, it would leave a mark. So it was one of those. It was like a double jeopardy. You didn't really want to put them on, but you wanted them on, but you didn't want to wreck the shirt at the same time.
Yeah. No, it's a great shirt.
We got another really good picture of you here up in the northeast, obviously during those seasons. A really good picture of you here battling against our arch enemy Sunderland. Did you enjoy the derby games when you were up at Newcastle?
Oh yeah, and people would before my first derby game, which was in my second season. They were saying it's like nothing you've experienced, and it was like nothing I'd experienced. And I remember going out there and I was tearing around on the field trying to make tackles, which, I wasn't known for my tackling skills, but it just gave me an extra bit of energy. And I remember the ball dropped between me and Paul Bracewell in midfield at St James's Park. And he was playing for Sunderland, and he dips his head a little bit to head it, and I volleyed through. I missed the ball and I volleyed him straight in the face. His nose went everywhere. And it was quite a bad break, to the point where he could have been in a bit of trouble if he ended up playing. I think they played in the cup final at the end of the season. Anyway, all that to say is he joins us the next season, and I had to go up and apologise to him. Said, tackling's not my forte, but in a derby match, anything goes. So they were brilliant, and of course the one with the famous Liam O'Brien free kick at Roker was. Yeah.
I was at that game. I was actually in the Sunderland stand because I couldn't get a ticket.
Yeah.
So I was hidden and in disguise. Throw this one up very quickly. So that was that winning team, the 92.
Yep.
And you look at that team and look at some of the faces. Obviously, Andy Cole had come in.
Yeah.
You got Brace still there. Kevin Sheedy, some players that were pivotal to that. Brian Kilcline, Liam O'Brien, and yourself at the front, along with Rob Lee. It was an amazing team, I think. And it's kind of like the Entertainers, really, Richie. I think it was a kind of generational thing. I've probably been quite lucky that I've seen both that team and the Entertainers. So, when you're talking to younger fans now that have never experienced that, we're quite blessed in a way to have seen those teams. But Richie, what are your views? And then we'll get to. I want to ask Gavin about what was his favourite match and his favourite goal, and then we'll kind of move it on a little bit.
I think, do you know what? One of the most memorable things about that season, because I think that's, I remember going to games when I was in 7, 8, 9 stuff. But I think that was probably the season where, you start to remember every single game pretty much all the way through, and you can know what happened here. And as I was saying to Martin before, I've got something that I'll show at the end, but I was on holiday, and it was the days when you went on holiday and didn't find out the score until the following day, until the papers arrived when you were abroad. But we actually landed back in Newcastle the day, and it was the day after the opening game of the season against Southend. And for some reason, obviously, the result was fantastic. The 3-2 result the day before. But when you landed, even the atmosphere in the airport was just, as they always say, whenever football goes well in Newcastle, it spreads like wildfire. Yeah. And that's exactly what it felt like as soon as you walked into the airport and we landed. The atmosphere was just different. I hadn't really seen that before supporting Newcastle, because we've never really been through the good times. And I think that atmosphere, that's what the team rode on, I would say, for the first 10 games for that season. And that pretty much set up that season for the promotion, in my opinion. Anyway, but do you believe in something that's what happened, Gavin, in a way?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that. I think it was it's a two-way thing with the town and the team. In my first season, I was, you do different appearances and that for the club, and I was taken to a local social club, And the owner of the social club did some pictures and what have you. He said to me, Gavin, he said, you don't know what it means to this city and the people when the team plays well and wins. He said, if they play well and win, people are up and they're out and they're celebrating. Productivity in the workplace goes up the next week because people are on a high. And the whole atmosphere of the city changes. And so then that starts to happen. So as the team starts to do well and play well, the fans and the city gets lifted. They get a lift, and they lift the team as well. So there's this upward spiral. Teams playing well, fans are getting lifted. Fans are lifting the team. Teams playing well, and that's what it was almost like this partnership and an upward spiral that season that just didn't stop till the end. And that's special, right? You don't get that everywhere.
I think it accumulated in the procession through Gosforth and everything with the trophy, because you know that's one of the major highlights I've got, because obviously we haven't really won much over the years, but I can remember standing on Gosforth High Street with the open top bus, and you know, just the atmosphere that day. It was absolutely fantastic, because that was my first experience of us really ever winning anything. You know, I was born in '79, so that was the first time we'd won a major trophy. So it's, you know, when obviously we had the FA Cups, you know, about 10 or so years later than that, but that was probably that moment accumulated the whole season, and it was just an epic ride from start to finish that season, and it was fantastic to be part of it. And I think that's what means so much to me about that season. It was my first memory of a full season, and also you tie it back into all the start of the Keegan days, yourself. You said David Kelly, Andy Cole, Scott Sellers, all that sort of just all molded together, and that was what built the entertainers. That's the first squad that was part of the entertainers that we all grew up and loved through the 90s.
Kind of like the planting the seed really from Keegan. So you get through that, you're enjoying life up in Newcastle. So from your perspective, Gavin, what was your best ever goal for Newcastle United?
Well, you mentioned those two at Ipswich. The first one in particular was a great goal. They're the best two goals I've scored in a game, like as two really good goals. But my best goal was Swindon at St James's Park that season. It was up March, April time, and the ball was cleared. We were on the attack. The ball was cleared out the box, and Kevin Scott half volleys it back into the box from just almost on the halfway line. So now it's coming, we're all coming out of the penalty box, it's coming over my head. And I've watched it. I mean, it's a long old ball coming in. I've watched it. I've caught it on my right foot, flicked it onto my left thigh, and in one movement back onto my right foot, volleyed it over Fraser Digby into the top of the net. And it was a goal that, you know, if that had been in the Premier League, or you had better, you know, even in the division,
you'd have been winning goal of the month.
It would have been a goal of the month, goal of the season contender for sure. I think it was a North East goal of the season. It came second. But it was one of those where everything, all the practice you do, the hours and hours and hours of practice, and, you know, I used to do a lot, all just came together in one moment of kind of artistry, really. It's your craft. And I think that's one of the things that I love to think of as being a professional footballer, is actually being able to it was my craft and putting on something that could entertain or please the fans, that would thrill them and get them off their seats, you know, with scoring good, beautiful goals and creative play. And that's what you work towards. And then it was obviously it was the Gallagher end as well. So I made it extra.
Always makes it extra special. Richie, we'll take a little section now for 5 minutes or so. Have we got any fan questions there?
Yeah, we've got plenty coming through. Julie, who's been one of our regulars, she's asked a really relevant question to now as well. There have been a few dismissive comments by some questioning why players would move to the Newcastle over other areas. Having made that move to the North East yourself, what would you say to those who have been negative? Yeah,
really, I've seen that. And they talk about Londoners and all of this, and yet the history of Newcastle is some, some Londoners that have had fantastic times at Newcastle. I mean, myself being one, Rob Lee, Malcolm McDonald. I don't know why. I mean, I think there's maybe recent comments. There might be a bit of jealousy involved with the, in terms of the club's financial status now. Misconception. I mean, Newcastle, fantastic city, historic area. We live just outside in Durham as well, which is beautiful. And as I said,
my neck of the woods. That Gavin, I live in Chesley Street. So
Chesley Street, some of the most beautiful countryside in the world. When I was up in October, my wife and I stayed at the Royal County Hotel in Durham, in the city,
right on the river.
Right on the river.
Hotel.
That's where we stayed for 3 months when I joined the club, and I went over the road to the estate agents and met the same fella that showed us properties all those years ago, still working there. John Burton, lovely fella. And so I think it's a misconception, because it's a beautiful, stunning part of the world with great history. And of course, again, the people that kind of making you feel at home. And anyone that then has been to the club from other parts, they realise that, and you've got your different players from Ginolas to Asprias and that have come and loved it up there.
Okay, very good. There you go, Julie. Next one.
Question from Mike Gent. He says he grew up next to the Benwell training ground and he used to go and watch you and the boys train. He wanted to know, why did they have a long jump behind the indoor complex?
That was specifically for Mickey Quinn. So we were training to see if he could get a bit more spring in his legs. And he didn't dent the field when he landed in the sand. No, no, I don't know, actually. I guess they did some kind of sporting events there in the summer or what have you, but we never used it, that's for sure.
So just before I got the next question, Gavin, did you was Benwell just your training, or did you move to Maiden Castle as well?
Maiden Castle, we started to move there, and then of course Kevin said that's got to be our home, because it's better surfaces for us. And it was like 5 minutes from where I lived in Durham City, so it was superb for me. Not much of a commute.
Very good.
Paul Oxley was one of Martin's good mates. He's actually put in Paul. What did you make of Paul Bracewell, Gavin? Yeah,
good question. I know Paul and Bracewell, of course. Brace was a fantastic player. Obviously, he was past his peak, and I used to watch Brace when I was a youngster, and he was in the great Everton team, under Howard Kendall. I mean, played for his country. When he came to us, he's still a good player, but he wasn't going to play every game. But one of the things that I would say about Bracewell, obviously he's a good player, could tackle, he could pass the ball, had good leadership, could hold the midfield. He was one of the bravest players I played with, extremely brave, not just going into tackles, but being like I said, when I volleyed him in the face, smashed his nose to pieces, and he still wanted to play on. And a very courageous player.
Does that?
Yeah, I remember that. He was hard as nails. Brace was.
Yeah. I was going to add to that. I was just going to ask Gavin, does it, when you talk about the likes of Bracewell like that, and some of the tackles and stuff that used to go in back then, does it annoy you now when you watch a football match and you see some of the fouls on the way that some of the players react?
Rubbish. Like, the game's gone with some of the, I'm all about, certain protection for players, but it's like in general, we've gone so much health and safety on anything that there's no risk allowed in anything, whether that's kids playing conkers in the playground or players putting in a tackle on a football field. Yeah. Tackling in and of itself is part of the game and is an art form when done well. And so, as I say, I wasn't renowned for my tackling, but I used to remember my dad would, as he was teaching me the game. Now we come to about tackling, and this is how you tackle and tackle well with good technique and steal the ball. And but it's ridiculous. And then obviously the reactions of some players, because they know then that minimal contact gets a free kick or a booking even, then you can actually some players will play on that.
That is an extra skill near enough now, I think, with some players. But
when you see something, when my dad was playing for Charlton, you talk about like back in the day in the 1960s, and he was playing as a winger. The fullbacks would tackle you around your neck, and they'd be able to get away with it. It was just part and parcel of the game.
Yeah, they'd never
you're right with what you said about
now.
You're right about what you said about the art. The tackle isn't art, and I remember when I was predominantly like a wide person, but then I had trials for the county and what used to be the Newcastle School of Excellence, and you know, I'd had the trial got put through in error as a fullback, and I remember like trying to think, well, how do I incorporate going from a midfielder back to a fullback? And my dad said to me, he said, one of the good people to watch when you look at tackling was Des Walker, because he was such a phenomenal tackler. He never ever rarely fouled. He was strong on the tackle, and you're right, is what you said. That was one of the reasons that helped me actually get into the county, because I was useless at tackling. You know, a lot of forwards will always say that they're not there to tackle really, and you know what fouls they create. But that was one of the things that I learned from that. And you're right, is what you said. Tackling is an art, and Bracewell was absolutely phenomenal at that.
He was.
Yeah. All right, Ricky, another question.
Yeah, we've got two more viewers' questions. Another one from Paul actually, and he says, "Could you believe the transformation in NUFC crowd-wise?" From when Ozzy was in charge midweek to when they got 15,000 gates when Keegan came in and there was the sellouts.
Yeah, no, I mean, it as the word there is, it was a transformation. And then not just the numbers, the volume went up as well, because the fans were enthused and the fans were hopeful. So then as a player, from being there with 15,000 or 20,000 under pressure, the team not doing too well, to then full houses, the team playing well, it was just night and day for us. And so, as I say, I think that became like, and the crowd became like an extra player for us.
Okay.
Yeah, the last viewer question that we've got, because we know you pushed for time tonight, was, and it's a good one to finish on from the viewers. Gavin, what was your most memorable moment at Newcastle, on or off the pitch?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously, I have to say the memorable moments. My debut for Newcastle at Leicester. I think Quinny scored a hat-trick, but we still lost the game. But pulling on the shirt for the first time, the 8 shirt, and seeing that in the dressing room, and then the support we had, and I had a decent game, I just knew that this was a club for me. Second memorable moment was surviving against Leicester in the relegation fight, and I scored, and we won 2-1, and we stayed up. And then the third memorable one will be the final game of the season against Leicester, which was like an exhibition match, and we're banging in goals left, right, and centre when we'd already got promotion. I was on the bench that day, having had the hamstring injury, got on for the last 20 minutes or so. And so even though I didn't play the full game, it was still just a memory. And walking around the stadium afterwards, and Pavel Srnicek, lovely Pav, who died a few years ago now, calls that, you know, Pavel is a Geordie, and just iconic moments like that, you'd have to say made it so memorable.
And that game as well, I remember being in the stands for that. It's not often you get double hat-tricks in a game. Like
no. I wonder when that last happened.
With 3 each, that game, wasn't it?
I think.
Just be going about stats. Well, we actually touched on it before. I couldn't actually believe, Gavin, but you actually made your debut and your last game for Newcastle was against the same team, and it was Leicester.
Yes, yeah, that's what I mean. So Leicester start, Leicester finish, and the memorable game of surviving against Leicester in the season before. So Leicester's played a big part in my Newcastle career.
It did, yeah.
So after 3 seasons, and we won't touch too much on it, but you obviously move off to Chelsea for a fee of $1.5 million. Was it tough leaving? Were you ready to leave? Was it time to go, move on, or?
Oh, it was tough, and I talk about all this in my book. When after that, you talk about that open top bus ride around the city. We won promotion. I was being captain, and things couldn't be better. I was a 2-year contract and left, and my wife was pregnant with our first child, Jake, And like a week or so later, she went into labour, and it was very difficult. 2 days, very hard labour, forceps delivery, had the cord wrapped around his neck when he came out. And then we're just so relieved that he was alive and my wife was alive. And then he started to cry, and I saw he had one hand missing. So he was born without his right hand, and we only had one scan those days. So it was a real shock. And then they were doing tests to see if there's anything else wrong, because with limb deficiency, you can get heart and lung issues at times. And Kevin was on the phone to me, Kevin Keegan, seeing how I was. And the whole thing then became really public because it was in the papers and went national and all of this. And it was our first baby. And I said to Kevin after a month or so in the summer, I said, you know, I love it here. I said, but I think we might want to look at moving back to London where our family is. It's our first child. We have a few extra things to cope with here. To be close to my wife's mum, and that would be desirable. And he said, look, I don't want you to go. We've got Beardsley coming in. He said, you, Cole, Clarkey, Beardsley would go. I think we'll put some great stuff together. He said, but if your wife's not happy, if your family's not right, you won't play your best football. He said, I won't outprice you in the market. And he said, that was his words to me. So she had great compassion.
That's great.
And then that's when a month later, Glenn Hoddle got the Chelsea job, and he'd wanted me before when he was at Swindon. And he sort of liked to make my first signing, and it was just timing in life. But there's never a place I've left with more of a tear in my eye than Newcastle, because if it hadn't been those family circumstances, I'd have stayed and hopefully been part of the entertainers for the next few years.
Yeah, it's funny where life takes you.
Yeah.
You mentioned there about your book. That is your book there by Gavin Peacock, A Greater Glory from Pitch to Pulpit, which we'll kind of move on to. You want to just tell people a little bit about the book, where they can get it from, Gavin? And
sure, yeah. So I wrote my autobiography. It came out earlier last year, May last year. I've been asked to write it a few times, and I'd always kind of held back. I thought, just turned 50 a few years ago. It was time to reflect on what was an interesting life. Obviously, with my dad being a footballer, me following in those footsteps, then going and work. I was on TV for 6 years on Match of the Day, and then giving it all up for church ministry that I'm in now, from pitch to pulpit, with being a pundit in between, was interesting. And so I wrote it myself. I didn't use a ghostwriter. Okay. And so it is the story. A lot of the stuff, we've talked about, and much more, with all the stories of my life and football, and the insight into the Match of the Day and all of that. And then when I left it all, and now my life briefly at the end in Canada. But I just say it's a story of life in all of its complexities, set against the backdrop of the beautiful game, with the light of my faith upon it. And so I touch on a lot of human interest things like life and death, and suffering, disability, and race, and career, and starting again in life. And so I think it's a book that kind of is a different kind of football biography. It has all those elements and all the stories and all the characters, but it has a depth to it there that, it'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, but it'll definitely make you think as well. And of course, Newcastle's a massive part of it. Massive chapter on Newcastle in the middle and at the end, and obviously with my beginnings at Newcastle, I think I've got a picture in there of me in my little Newcastle kit when I'm a kid.
Very good. So go ahead and grab it.
People can get it on Amazon.
Yeah, I was going to say, go out there and grab it. Go grab the book and have a read. You've been listening to Gavin for the last 49 minutes. It's absolutely fascinating. So last 10 minutes, we know you're under time constraints. So obviously life moved on. You retired 2002, as you said, did a bit of punditry, and then went into the ministry side of things. So how you're in Canada now? We were talking pre-show.
Yep.
Over in North America with the wife, family, and stuff. So how is life now? How is life for Gavin and family?
Yeah, I mean, we're well. I mean, Jake, the boy who was born in Newcastle, is a married man now with a little son, our first grandson, our first grandchild. He's coming up for a year, so they're here in Calgary. Him and his wife Krista, and our daughter Ava has married an Alberta lad, and they've been married for 3 years. So the family's kind of bedded down here a bit, and life, is different from football here for me. As you know, I'm involved in the church, of part of the leadership there, and I will preach in the church. I do a lot of counselling and obviously visiting folk that are not well, and walking with people through the ups and downs of their life. And so it's a great privilege to do that, because you're dealing with people's lives and their souls, and it doesn't get the headlines like you do on the football field, but it's very rewarding. And I do come back to England a couple of times a year when asked to do some ministry stuff, and also do football things as well, fans events, often up in Newcastle. So yeah, it's life is good. Who knows what's around the corner? Never say never to returning to England, but we'll see.
What's I suppose I'm conscious of the time and not holding you up. So I suppose from my perspective, given kind of where you've been, where you are now, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to anybody?
Well, you mean just in general in life?
Yeah, what's a piece of good advice you could give to someone? So you said there, you never know what's around the corner. So, what would you say to someone that might be, looking for a piece of advice to say, I suppose I'm trying to fathom it out, if they're having a bit of a downtime, or, they're wondering when the next break of luck comes or whatever. So, I suppose from what you do now, from a ministry point of view, what would you say what's a good piece of advice for someone to carry around with them?
Well, a good piece of advice is to figure out what life's all about, and why you're here, and what the purpose of life is. And I think once everyone's searching for identity, aren't they? At the moment, everyone's searching for hope and purpose, and very much. I always relate to football. You think about it. People, they want this hope of glory. And that's in their football team, and they want the sense of identity that they find in their football team, and togetherness. They go together to the game as they cheer their team on, as their team would thrill them with the excellence of their play, and that the fans then could join in with that as they get that glory of the victory. So we were kind of made for hope and glory and identity that football very much has that about. But of course, with football, it only lasts so long. And in my book called A Greater Glory, I just hint and point towards the real glory that we were made for, in God making us and being able to know Him through Jesus Christ, and living in accordance with His word. And so that would be the greatest piece of advice that I could give someone. Anything else then flows from there. And that was my foundation as a footballer, so that I wasn't, if you like, I didn't take my identity from the sum of my performances on a Saturday. It was elsewhere, so that when my football was gone, I still had my identity, hope, and purpose. And I think, there's a lot of people that are suffering in these days. In the last couple of years, people start to think a little bit more deeply about life and its purpose, and we've been faced by lots of disease and death, and people not being able to see loved ones, people losing finances. And so they're thinking, what can I stand on? What can be relied upon? And again, that's what I point to in my book, A Greater Glory Than Football, Fame and Fortune.
I think that, Martin, it's actually quite a fitting time to bring up what we mentioned before. Obviously, Gavin doesn't know about this, but obviously both of us do. When you were over here for the Chelsea game and you did the event at the Irish Centre, which I was privileged to be there, you had numerous photographs taken with several fans and stuff at the event as well. You also had this picture taken before you went into the ground with Dave Harrison and Steve Hasty at the food bank. Now, the reason why I brought this picture, and you're probably unaware of this, unfortunately, Gavin, but unfortunately, Dave Harrison passed away last Monday, unfortunately, in his sleep. And it was just a reminder that, obviously, you were saying there, live life to the full, find out what you want to do. And, Dave loved to help out with the food bank. He was a fantastic supporter of Newcastle, the fan base in general on social media. We knew him from coming on our show, other podcasts as well, but also his work he did with the Great British Archery as well. And it was also just to let everyone know who Pops hasn't been on social media. But tomorrow at the game, Newcastle will be doing a standing, or a clap, should I say, on the 69th minute, which was unfortunately how old Dave was when he passed away. They're going to put his picture up in the ground and do a military round of applause for Dave Harrison for all his work he did for the food bank and the fan base. So it was a little bit of a sad, but I actually spoke to him on that night as well, Gavin. I know it was a fantastic night. And it's a shame that he's unfortunately not with us anymore. But I did speak to him. He said he really enjoyed that night. We obviously met you a couple of times on the night itself and the day after as well. I just thought it was quite fitting because obviously you're out tonight, you've met him, and what was happening was just to bring that up towards the end of the show before you left.
I did hear about that actually, Rich, and I was very saddened and shocked. And to think that photo was just a few weeks ago, and he looked so well and lovely man, and of course everyone speaks so well of him. And so yeah, life is short, and as you rightly say, we need to get wisdom for living. Yeah,
exactly. Right. On that note, Gavin, and we've taken up a load of your time, and I know you've got other things after this. So from me and Richie, and from everybody watching, can we just say a massive, massive thanks? It's been absolutely amazing talking to you. An absolute privilege meeting you. And hopefully at some point later on, we get you back on Loaded Mag again. We would love to wish you and the family all the very best for 2022 and hope things go well in Canada and with the ministry and everything else. Keep in touch with us, boys, on Loaded. But thanks very, very much for coming on and talking to us.
No, pleasure is mine, and it's a great show. I hope you get lots of listeners. Thanks.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much, Gavin. That's
Cheers,
great.
guys.
Thanks very much. Listen, guys, that's Gavin Peacock and us from Loaded. We'll call it a night, and we will talk to you later on. Thanks very much. Thanks for watching. We shall talk to you later on. Bye-bye now.
Good night.